it's the fuwas. My name is Spvwvvky. I'm a girl failure angel cat variety reaction streamer who streams every day, and I start anytime between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. EST for about 4 to 6 hours, so come and say hi. Today we're watching this cave diver's end was extremely disturbing but scary interesting. As always, if you have any recommendations for you'd like me to react to, leave a comment below so I can check it out, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you can support me. Also, I just want to give a quick shout out to my front page. Twitch debuted on February 11th, 7 p.m. EST, so make sure you drop by, okay? That's really important. Really important. Okay, bye. I mean, enjoy.
And welcome back to Scary Interesting. In this video, we're going to go over 3 separate people who went cave diving and then accidentally got separated from their group. In each instance, what happened to them after they got separated would be incredibly disturbing, but for completely different reasons. And in particular, the final story is prolonged, grueling, and in the end, the conclusion is just downright horrifying. You'll see what I mean, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. On July 19th, 2025, a man named Wang and a diving partner entered what was likely the River Youshui of China's Hunan province.
Whoa,
it was late at night when the two
China!
descended into the river for what was supposed to be a routine dive they had both performed numerous times. Only about 5 minutes into the dive though, Wang's partner lost track of Wang and immediately returned to the surface, hoping his friend would show up within minutes. When that didn't happen, the dive partner heard to call for help. The reason Wang was missing was because he had unknowingly entered a separate cave system about 30 feet or 9 meters below the river's surface. This cave was part of South China's karst system, and to say the system is massive would be a dramatic understatement. It spans more than 212,000 square miles across multiple Chinese provinces. Running into one of the branches of this system wouldn't necessarily be unexpected for divers, but even though Wang had performed this dive before, it was a whole new world to him. It seemed that after entering the system, either due to being lost or simply being amazed, he went deeper and deeper, and before he knew it, his once completely full air cylinder was running drastically low. As he made his way through the system, he must have looked down and seen that his air cylinder dropped below 15%, then 10%, and in front of him were endless tunnels. As this situation became more and more desperate, and Wang likely got increasingly frantic and panicked, by some miracle, he stumbled on an air pocket about 348 feet or 100 meters inside the cave.
What the?
It wasn't big, but it was enough that he was able to pull himself out of the water and settle himself down on the rocks inside. Miraculously as well, it also had enough air to keep himself sustained without the use of his air cylinder, which was now sitting at just 4%. But obviously at the same time, there was a new problem. He was now in a little dark room with no way out in one of the largest cave systems on Earth, so all he could do was sit and wait and hope for rescue. Outside the cave, he had no way of knowing that a search and rescue operation was already being organized in hopes of saving him. Authorities were notified of the situation by his dive partner, and the police reached out to a rescue team and a group of specialist cave divers from the police force. Members of each team then rushed the site and began making preparations to find Wang, although hope of finding him alive was already thin. He had already been missing for hours, maybe longer, when the dive team first entered the water to search for him. It's likely that this was already treated as a body recovery, and due to the risks, the search was deliberate and careful. Why risk others by searching haphazardly if the person you're searching for is already gone? But either way, they scoured the inside of the system in excess of 420 feet or 130 meters in length and found absolutely no sign of him.
That's so fucked up. Why search for somebody if the chances are that they're already gone is like actually so fucked up?
Before turning back to the entrance.
They should try.
In the days that followed, a second attempt was organized after the rescue team detected what sounded like rocks being knocked together. It was difficult to tell what the noise was or where it was coming from, with boat engines running at the surface, so the team asked the engines to be turned off so they could hear it better. When that happened, however, the silence was deathly. No one could hear anything coming from inside the cave. So they thought maybe it was an illusion or just a trick of the ears, but rescuers decided they weren't going to take any chances anyway. Instead, they were going to try to find him one more time. By this point, 5 days had passed and Wang was still clinging to life inside the air pocket. He had enough air to keep him alive and plenty of fresh water to hydrate him, but he couldn't live there forever. To keep himself fed as well, Wang actually was able to get his hands on some fish swimming beneath the surface and ate them raw inside the air pocket under the beam of his flashlight. But even with food, imagine being stuck in this little room under the earth, knowing just how unlikely it would be to be found. At some point, you have to figure your mind must wander to the worst case scenario. Then, on July 24th, he noticed something deep beneath his air pocket that gave him a shot of hope. Flashlight beams were darting back and forth against the rock below, and he knew it had to be rescue divers looking for him. So grabbing a loose rock, he then banged it as hard as he could against the walls, hoping that the sound would get the attention of the divers.
Wow.
But his heart sank as he watched them swim right past him and toward the deeper recesses of the cave system. So once again, the rescue team reached the 420-foot mark from the entrance without finding Wang and decided to turn back. And with this being unsuccessful, there would not be a third attempt. Heading back toward the entrance in defeat, the rescue team suddenly heard a loud splash and saw a flashlight beam waving frantically above them. As the divers looked up, they could see where it was coming from. Wang had once again seen the divers coming, but this time he jumped into the water in a desperate attempt to let them know where he was. The rescue divers were obviously stunned as they fully expected this would be a recovery mission at this point. After assessing Wang, who was beyond excited to see them, he was fitted with a full air cylinder and guided back to the entrance. As was the first team, the rescue support team waited near the mouth of the cave could hardly believe their eyes when the dive team returned with one extra person. Despite the ordeal and all he had been through for 5 days and nights, he was apparently in surprisingly good condition as he walked unaided to the ambulance, and the first thing he said to rescuers after removing his dive gear was, quote, "Do you have a cigarette?" The captain of the rescue team would later tell reporters at the scene that Wang was incredibly lucky to be found, pointing out that when he was discovered, it was his last chance at rescue. In September of the year 2000, Paul was back in his hometown in
Nah, literally asking for a cigarette is such a Chinese thing to do. Bro had nicotine cravings in the pocket. And literally sitting in an air pocket in a perilous cave system, the biggest cave system in the world, he goes, "Got any ciggies?"
California, spending time with family and looking for a fun challenge to do with his brother, but he didn't have to go too far to find one. It was a place he was intimately familiar with, and one you wouldn't find on any maps or trail websites. This area, called Goss Canyon, was one where he and his brothers and sisters had once spent summers exploring as kids, but few outsiders even know this place exists. Goss Canyon is a rugged, mountainous landscape tucked away in the foothills of La Crescenta. And to the uninitiated, it doesn't look like much, just some granite walls with brush creeping down the slopes, but at the top of the canyon, hidden among those granite cliffs, was a relic of another era. There's an abandoned well that was blasted into the mountainside back in 1915. Whatever purpose it once served had long been forgotten, but the structure remained. And it's more than just a hole in the mountain. Although the well is a dark, narrow shaft only a few feet across, it plunges into the earth and opens into a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns. For Paul and his family, incredibly, it was a place flooded with memories, and he was eager to return to explore once more. September 17th, 2000 began with Paul and his 42-year-old brother Michael gathering up their hiking and scuba gear before making their way to Goss Canyon. That morning, they hiked together with their packs weighed down by scuba tanks, regulators, and rope. When Paul and Michael reached the opening in the granite, they set down their gear and began to prepare for a dive they'd performed countless times before. Their plan was for Paul to anchor a rope at the water's edge inside the canyon, using it as a guideline to get himself back to safety, and he and Michael would tether themselves to it. He had 2 hours of air on his back and told Michael that if anything went wrong once those 2 hours were up, to go get help. Inside the 3 feet by 4 feet opening, the passage narrowed quickly. It was the kind of space that forces you to crawl, twist, and squeeze your body in uncomfortable ways. The water that collected in the shafts was also shockingly cold and would numb the skin within minutes. It was also thick with silt that clouded under the beam of a diving flashlight. And Paul, ever cautious, often carried a lighter to flick
How do you flick on a lighter underwater? And also, what's silt?
on inside the caverns to check air pockets for poisonous gases before taking a breath. For the first 15 minutes of the dive, everything was routine.
No way.
Paul disappeared into the water, and the rope connecting him to Michael was their only means of communicating. Tugs on the line meant that Paul was moving and things were fine. Meanwhile, stillness meant he was working deeper into the cavern. Up to that point, the tugs on the rope had been steady, but they suddenly stopped making sense. Michael gave a pull, expecting Paul to answer back with the same reassuring jerk that said he was fine, but nothing came. Michael then tried again, this time a little bit harder, but he still received nothing in return. Somewhere in the dark, it seemed that Paul's rope had tangled, catching him at the worst possible spot. Michael then pulled with everything he had, straining against the line, but it was no use. Paul wasn't coming free. Minutes then began to tick by in a haze of panic, but Michael knew the rules and he had to be patient. Anything beyond 2 hours meant he had to run for help, and soon enough, that time had come without Paul's return. Michael then made the only decision he could and scrambled out of the well with his heart racing as he barreled down the trail toward help.
Yikes.
By 1:20 p.m., Michael rushed through the doors of Crescenta Valley Sheriff's Station. Within minutes, the
That's
sheriff's
so
team was on its way
far.
back to Goss Canyon, hauling their own tanks and gear up to the hidden well shaft.
That's literally so
Horrifyingly,
far.
3 hours after Michael had run for help, the rescue divers finally reached Paul. He was wedged in a narrow shaft, his body half in the water and half out.
Oh, thank
His head
God.
was tilted above the surface of a pocket as if he was trying to catch his breath. At first glance, it didn't make sense. His tank was still strapped to his back and he had plenty of air left. His regulator also hung at his side and there was no sign of a violent struggle or a catastrophic equipment failure. It was as though Paul had simply stopped.
Oh my god,
Back on the
dead.
surface in the days after the tragedy, the picture grew stranger. Investigators noted that Paul hadn't drowned in a traditional sense as there was no evidence that he had run out of air. Instead, after examination, the coroner pointed to suffocation or lack of oxygen as the likely cause of Paul's death. But why would a man with a perfectly good tank of air abandon it in the middle of a dive? The answer would come from a videotape in Paul's diving camera.
Whoa.
When it was played back, the footage showed his last moments in haunting detail. The beam of his light swept across the walls of the cavern as he edged into a tight tunnel. Then it angled upward into a hollow pocket above the waterline. Paul then surfaced, removed his regulator, and took a breath. A second later, the camera jolted and fell as Paul's body collapsed. The conclusion was chilling as Paul hadn't brought his lighter like he usually did. The air pocket he had surfaced in hadn't contained air at all, at least not the kind you could survive on. It was either too low in oxygen or tainted with other gases, the kind that can render a person unconscious almost instantly. By trusting it, even for a single breath, Paul had sealed his fate. Located just north of the Polish-Slovakian border.
Wait, so Paul breathed in gas? Is that what Paul breathed in? Like in the air pocket, it was like a pocket of gas? So instead of breathing like normal air? Oh, wow, so he insta-died.
Zakopane, and just to the south lies Bistra Cave on the northern slopes of the Tatra mountain range. Water flows through it through the nearby Bistra spring that has carved out a series of tunnels and passages into the literal mountainside. The result is a system more than a kilometer long with a maximum depth of at least 53 meters or 173 feet. On top of its size, the cave is a mix of wet and dry sections through a series of sumps or siphons. By 1987, the sumps inside the cave had become almost legendary within the local cave diving community.
What's worse? Cave diving on dry caves or cave diving in water? Which one's worse?
That's because despite many attempts, no one ever made it through the fifth one and beyond, and there were several very good reasons for this. For one, the water that flows through the cave is part of the intake supply for a nearby city, meaning diving in it could risk contamination. Beyond that though, beneath the water in the fifth sump, the passage narrows so much that it's just about impassable for the vast majority of divers. But if you're familiar with the channel, you know this wasn't going to stop several young divers from trying. On the night of February 15th, 1987, 3 Polish divers and one from Yugoslavia named Alexei snuck into the cave through an access point adjacent to the gated main entrance. They then began their journey to the first pool. Now, getting to the fifth sump would require them to enter and exit the water several times as they pass through the first 4 siphons. All of these are passable, but they still contain their own unique dangers. The sumps are not straightforward ups and downs, so just getting to the fifth sump was a bit of a challenge in itself. Inside an area of the cave known as the Hall of Waterfalls, 3 of the divers, including Alexei, suited up and entered the first pool. The 4th among them was going to remain outside the water and act as a support should anything go wrong. At 10 p.m., the other 3 disappeared under the water of the first pool and began the long journey through each of the first 4 sumps, moving through cracks, narrow squeezes, and areas of strong water flow as they went. And as a testament to the difficulty, they wouldn't arrive at the 5th until just before 1 a.m. Also already exhausted from the effort, the 2 Polish divers were more than happy to let Alexei explore the 5th sump first while they took a breather. Before he went under, the 3 discussed a quick dive plan. Alexei would spend about 15 minutes inside before returning to them to report what he saw within the past.
So my question is, why would they go diving at 10 p.m.? And if they leave a 4th person there for help, how long do they have in their air tanks? Who would they ask for help from at 10 p.m.? Or past midnight?
Passageway. From there, they'd enter as a group and try to pass through the infamously narrow clamp to become the first to ever do it. Once this plan was agreed on, Alexei slipped into the water and began making his way through the sump. 20 minutes later, however, Alexei still hadn't returned, so one of the Polish divers entered the water to see if he could find him. But when he started heading straight down, he immediately noticed just how silted out the water was. He pressed on, hoping to find Alexei somewhere along the way, but then he made a horrifying realization. It wasn't just silt that was coming loose from the rock walls, it was also the rock walls themselves. Large chunks of limestone were literally breaking off and tumbling downward past the diver. It was almost like the cave itself was slowly collapsing around him, but incredibly still, he continued searching for Alexei. Not too much further ahead, the diver reached the narrow constriction that had prevented anyone before from seeing what was on the other side. For just a brief moment in his search for Alexei, he paused and marveled at the extremely narrow crack. It was only about 2 feet or 0.7 meters wide and 6 feet or 2 meters tall. And it was immediately clear to the diver why no one had dared to enter it, and he wasn't about to give it a shot right then. So turning his attention back to the search for Alexei, he spun back around and began making his way back toward the entrance to Sump 5. When he finally surfaced again, he still hadn't seen any sign of Alexei other than the silted out cavern. As the two divers waited at the sump entrance once again, bubbles started to rise from below. They were certain that Alexei was about to surface, and now that they were pretty sure he was okay, they were annoyed that he didn't follow the plan they agreed on. As they waited, more and more bubbles came to the surface, but after about 20 minutes, there was still no further sign of Alexei himself. So once again, one of the Polish divers entered the fifth sump to look for him, but visibility was now down to about 8 inches or 20 centimeters. The sump was now nearly impassable due to the amount of silt suspended in the water, as the diver turned back around and resurfaced. For another hour, the two divers watched as the bubbles broke the surface until they abruptly stopped. When that happened, they knew something was wrong, and the two immediately started making their way back to the entrance of Bistro Cave to get help.
That's scary.
At around 6:15 a.m. on February 16th, members of the Polish mountain rescue organization known as GOPR arrived at the cave. As soon as authorities assessed the situation, they called in the Warsaw Diving Club to assist, but it wouldn't be until 10 p.m. before they finally made it to Bistro. Then another 3 hours later at 1 a.m. on February 17th, so exactly 24 hours since Alexei disappeared, divers from Warsaw entered the sump. After descending a few dozen feet, however, they experienced the same conditions Alexei's Polish partners did. The silt made visibility almost zero, and chunks of rock were falling off the walls inside. So seeing no other option, they turned back around to regroup. Several more attempts were made at trying to explore the sump, but it was just too dangerous. After 9 hours of trying to just access the main portion of the passage, the divers had to call it
they
quits.
couldn't go in.
This wasn't a sign the operation had turned from a rescue to a body recovery, though. The hope at this point was that Alexei had somehow made it through the narrow restriction and was now stuck on land between the 5th and 6th sumps. If this were the case, rescuers had the benefit of time, knowing that he could still be alive in there for a few days. On the flip side though, if Alexei had gotten into trouble in the water, he'd have been long dead by this point. Still, the rescue team members kept faith that Alexei was just trapped on the other side of the restriction, safe in a dry section. The next day, another attempt to pass through the 5th sump was made by a set of Yugoslavian divers, but they only experienced more of the same: silt, falling rocks, and no visibility. One of the bigger consequences of silting in a cave is that sediment can spend days suspended in the water before it settles back down. The frequent attempts to enter the passage also only stirred things up more and more, preventing the silt from settling, but things were quickly getting to the point where waiting was no longer an option. And yet, for some reason or another, almost a week passed before another set of divers would get through the first 4 sumps and attempt to breach the 5th again. This time, they would try to access the 5th sump by using a separate entrance called the Crystal Siphon. The belief was that there was a connection point between the two passageways, and
what
this
if
turned
they
out to be
just
the
cut
case.
it?
Divers then used the benefit of the clear water.
What if they literally just make the hole bigger? Can they make the hole bigger underwater?
Crystal Siphon to get into the 5th sump before reaching the infamous restriction. But, once again, it was just so narrow and visibility was still so bad that the effort had to be abandoned. And again, this was almost a week after he first disappeared. By then, with limited options, GOPR authorities were tossing around the idea of pumping the siphons clear of water to make accessing the 5th sump easier. But this was far more complicated than simply executing the plan. Approval would have to be given by the city nearby, which didn't come in until noon on February 23rd, and it took a lot of time to get all the necessary equipment up to the cave. It wasn't until 6 a.m. on the 24th, so 9 days after they entered the cave, that the first sump was emptied and work on the second began. Even just getting the water out of the first 4 sumps, though, was a drain on both time and electricity. The pumps required so much power that the electrical grid actually failed, and power couldn't be restored until more than 5 days later. By this point, it was seen as though there was very little chance that...
Okay, but like... the friends got into the slit, right? So why can't they just get the friends to go back in instead of these bozos who don't know what they're doing? Obviously, they have no idea what they're doing. I mean, look at how bad they are. Just get the other people to go back in, man.
Alexei would still be found alive. Pumping started again on February 29th, almost 2 weeks after Alexei's ordeal began. But after nearly 2 days of pumping, the sump had only dropped a little more than an inch or 3 centimeters. The pumps on location just weren't strong enough to overcome the reflow of water, so the rescue team had high-capacity pumps brought in. Unfortunately, the difference in results with the stronger pumps was marginal. Between March 6th and 9th, the pumps ran 24 hours a day and only reduced the water level by about 6 inches or 15 centimeters. While all of this was going on, GOPR authorities discussed the possibility of bringing divers from the esteemed French rescue organization. And as it became more and more apparent that the pumps just weren't going to be a match for the fifth siphon, the call was put out. On March 13th, around 9 p.m., several French divers arrived on the scene and entered the fifth sump for an exploratory dive. But another attempt to find Alexei wouldn't occur for another 6 days.
Is this like a rescue mission at this point?
More than a month after Alexei disappeared, the French divers and a support team entered the finally clear waters of the fifth sump. Only about 33 feet, or 10 meters down, they discovered Alexei's lifeless body completely tangled in his own guide rope. Carefully, the divers cut him free and brought his body to the surface of Sump 5. After an examination of the scene, authorities put together a reconstruction of what they believe happened to Alexei in the early morning hours of February 16, 1987. After having a discussion with his fellow dive partners, Alexei submerged into Sump 5 and began a vertical descent through what were the clear waters ahead of him. It's believed that he actually made it through the extremely narrow section called the Clamp, becoming the first diver on record to do so. It's thought that he then surfaced on the other side, where he attached a guide rope. After attaching the rope to the dry section between Sumps 5 and 6, Alexei re-entered Sump 5 about 30 to 40 minutes after first departing his partners. As he started returning through the passageway with a spool of guide rope in hand, he reached restriction again. Only this time he found it impassable due to the narrowness of the squeeze on the exit side and the extremely poor visibility caused by his entrance into the sump. Upon realizing this, instead of turning around and returning to the dry section between Sumps 5 and 6 to wait for help, Alexei panicked. And in doing so, he started to become entangled in the guide rope in the low visibility conditions.
Oh my god,
At that point, he was hopelessly bound up and stuck underwater with no way to escape. All he could do was struggle and wait for his air supply to run out, which it eventually did.
I mean, at least they recovered his dead body.
Thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the forum found in the description. Also, if you want to support the channel, consider joining the Patreon.
Dude, that's so cool. Nah, I love scary, interesting. Everyone should buy to YouTube. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed your time and your stay.